Stax is one of the scariest words to a Commander player. So scary, in fact, that right now you can probably find some people in the comments talking about how Stax is the worst thing ever and they would never play in a pod with a Stax deck, yada yada. They're not going to watch this video. But I think part of the reason for that is most players have no idea what Stax is or how a Stax deck actually plays. I think two of the big misconceptions is that Stax equals land destruction and Stax equals long games. Both of these are very wrong. But before I get into what Stax is, I just want to talk about how I'm able to play Stax, Blue Control, or many other supposedly salty archetypes at my Commander pods without issues. I've always been pro play what you want on this channel, and sometimes I get comments about how I'm able to deal with the salt. But in my many years of playing EDH with multiple playgroups across many game stores and events, I've never run into much salt. Nobody has ever asked me to play a different deck, join another pod, or refuse to play against me or any of my lists. And there are reasons for this. One is that I always match power levels, and Stax is inherently a powerful strategy. You have to keep that in mind when you're playing your deck. There are multiple Stax strategies that I think are too strong for bracket 2, period, even without game changers or combos. So I would stay away from low power games with those decks. The second reason I don't encounter salt is I'm kind of just a chill guy. Stax is an archetype where you will be playing weird cards that do strange things, and you need to be forthcoming with your information and explain all of your effects. Be on top of your triggers. People already don't want to go back and let you draw an extra card if you miss something, and people really don't want to go back and be forced to bounce a land to their hand if they missed something a turn ago. Plus, Stax is a deck that does get targeted for good reason as well. I never complain about being archenemy or getting my stuff blown up, because yes, that is correct threat assessment most of the time. If you do those things, people really don't mind Stax as much as people say they do. But what is Stax exactly? Well, I'll tell you right after today's sponsor. This is my pet lizard Jojo, and if you know my channel, you know that means today's video is sponsored by Card Castle, the easy way to sort your collection digitally. Card Castle lets you scan cards and put them into a digital collection. This lets you effortlessly sort through your cards, and it helps me when building decks. I have my cards tagged in a big box of Commander playable cards and a few binders. This way, I'm able to check what I have already at home when I'm out and about. I actually used this recently at MagicCon Vegas. I was theory crafting an Esper deck, and I wanted to know if I had a Meticulous Archive or not. And I was able to check that I actually had one in my binder at home, and didn't end up buying an extra copy that I didn't need. And I saved money because of that. I also saw their card sorting robot in person, which they also have, but that's mostly for game stores. It's kind of cool. No, that's the bowl. You gotta eat the food inside the bowl. Anyway, on a free account, you can scan up to 1,000 cards, plus you get 3 tags to put those cards into. But if you use my link below, you'll get 1 free month of premium access, which gives you more tags and you can scan more than 1,000 cards. So click the link below, make a free account, and start digitally sorting your collection today. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the video. So if Stax isn't just land destruction, what is it? More broadly, Stax is a resource denial strategy. Resources can mean a lot of different things. Cards in hand, creatures on board, or lands. Cards that prevent an opponent from doing something would generally be Stax. So rule of law effects or stranglehold. Tax effects or cards that make casting things more difficult are also usually Stax. I do want to note that Punisher effects are usually Stax adjacent rather than actual hard stacks. Ob Nixilis Unshackled doesn't deny the opponent from tutoring unless their life gets really low. Stranglehold does literally stop you from tutoring, so Stranglehold is Stax and Ob is a Punisher effect. There are a few other random things like Nevermore effects or removal engines, which you could argue are Stax, but ultimately it doesn't matter too much. The only context you need for this video is that Stax is when you deny a resource, not lands exclusively. But why would you want to do that at all? Like, why play Stax in the first place? Well, there's a very common commander problem that I think is solved partially by stacks. There is a term called the commander arms race. The idea is that within a playgroup, if one player upgrades their deck, then the others have to do the same to keep up. And it leads to an ever increasing spiral until everyone just plays CDH. Of course, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. If you and your playgroup wants to play high power commander or CDH, I mean, that's fine. I love CDH. It's just sometimes there can be a conflict where some players don't want to speed up the games. They're not interested in upgrading their deck in that manner. They don't want to combo faster, ramp harder, draw more cards. They just want to play their silly, slower game. And that's where the commander arms race becomes an issue, and there's a schism in the playgroup. One solution to this is by upgrading your deck in a different way, which is to slow down your opponents instead of speeding up your deck to match theirs. A rule of law effect means nobody can play Oracle Consultation combo until rule of law is gone. A rest in peace means breach combos are not available until it leaves. Tax effects makes doing a storm turn nearly impossible. Tutor hate stops stronger decks from getting their best cards and makes combos less consistent. A lethal vapors prevents fast creature decks from just taking out the table too quickly. A Sire of Insanity ruins blue control decks. And none of this speeds up the game. Instead of building a turn 3 combo to beat your friend's turn 4 combo deck, you can just play Deafening Silence and all of the combo decks suddenly have to wait extra turns to remove the piece and then do the combo. I know, of course, you can just talk to your pod about power creep, but sometimes that can be hard to convince multiple people to take all of the upgrades out of their deck, especially if they spent a lot of money and time building that into their deck. And honestly, if they want to play the One Ring, I mean, is it not only fair that you play Collector Oof? Stax decks really prey on fast, efficient lists, and can be tuned in a way that they barely affect slower creature mid-range decks. I genuinely think Stax is a real way for players to play what is effectively a slow creature mid-range deck, similar to classic battlecruiser decks of old, without losing to faster power crept cards. And I think that idea is appealing to a lot of players. Now, there are many types of Stax decks. Each color has its own special flavor of Stax effects, and that changes how they play. White has rule-setting cards, cards that say players can't do this, or that doesn't trigger, or spells cost 1 more. Also, white has access to mass land destruction. Blue has land bounce effects, untap control, and the ability to tap down things. Black is best at creature denial and discard. Red has the most destructive effects, with not just mass land destruction, but mass almost everything destruction. Green is kind of weird for stacks. There aren't too many actual stacks effects outside of artifact and enchantment hate, but green is quite good at parity breaking and supporting other stacks themes. And of course, there are tons of colorless stacks cards that allow you to push your stacks deck in one way or another, no matter what color you're playing. Parity breaking is one of the most fascinating parts of stacks. When you look at a lot of stacks cards, they usually affect all players equally, other than Draneth Magistrate, which is why I think it's the least interesting stacks piece. So parity breaking is when you take one of these stacks effects that affect all players equally, and you do something so you're not harmed by the stacks piece as much as your opponents, or sometimes at all. Parity breaking can come in a few forms. One can be in your deck's construction. If you play Thalia and Deafening Silence effects, simply jamming a lot of creatures breaks parity because you're less likely to need non-creature spells. A Tectonic Instability or Price of Glory only hurts decks that want to play at instant speed, so if you don't have any counter magic, they're much less of an issue. Parity breaking can also come in the form of other cards. This combines to make a sort of combo. Many old artifact stacks cards turn off when they're tapped. So a card that lets you tap your own artifacts will let you skip out on the downside, while your opponents still have to deal with the effect. Parity breaking is the most important part of a stacks deck. This is how you actually win games, and win them in an efficient manner. A large amount of players have this misconception that stacks decks just drag out games for hundreds of turns without winning. This is why players think green decks don't lose to mass land destruction. They assume the green deck will have enough time to play 4 lands, find their Splendid Reclamation, and cast it. But if you break parity well enough, that doesn't happen. If you cast your big Stax card and players recover from it, then either you played it at the wrong time or something went terribly wrong. When I'm playing Armageddon, it's usually because I have 5+ mana worth of rocks in play, and maybe a Sun Titan and an extra land in hand, so I can speed back into the game very quickly and just deploy my board and take other players out. When I play a Yockelhops, it's because I have a Planeswalker with a game-winning ultimate in play. With a parity breaker, the Stax piece should feel like a one-sided card that sets you up to win very quickly afterwards. While it is true that Stax decks do drag the game out a little longer, it's usually because they just stop the most efficient, fast ways to win the game, and in actuality are not much slower than any other casual list which is playing creature beatdown as their main win con. And if you're playing a Stax deck which regularly lets players catch back up and recover, that means your Stax deck is lacking win conditions. You should be winning the game before they have the time to do that. Let's move on to how Stax decks play. I'll start with Hate Bears as an example. This is the simplest Stax deck. You play creatures with effects that stop or slow down players and then pump them up for lethal. These decks are usually playing rule-setting Stax cards that deny your opponents from triggers or playing multiple spells. White is the primary color for this type of deck since Hate Bears are mostly in white. But you can splash green for a few others, plus green gives you mana dorks and general creature synergies. Red is another good option for Hate Bears since you get Punisher cards which, although are not technically Stax effects, they do help you close out games. And you get other aggressive creatures in red. Black also has a few Hate Bears and tutors to help you find the correct one at the right time. I think Azorius might be the worst color combo for Hate Bears, but don't let me stop you from brewing. Hate Bears decks have the additional benefit of being pretty casual friendly. Lower power battlecruiser decks don't really care about a lot of these effects that I'm showing on screen right now, and they don't tend to slow down the game too much. As long as you're packing some way to turn those 2/2s into bigger creatures, your deck will feel like a pretty regular commander list. These are decks that beat combo, and depending on the list, your Hate Bears deck might also be decent against control, but it kind of depends. And Hate Bears decks are weakest against creature mid-range lists. Another common Stax deck is discard. Obviously, the resource being denied here is cards in hand. I feel like most people know how discard decks operate. You make people discard cards, and then you play things that trigger when people discard cards. These decks excel versus combo and control specifically. Things like Bottomless Pit are brutal if you want to hold up counter magic or save a combo piece for later. Next is anti-creature stacks. There are a plethora of Stax cards that simply destroy creature decks. Denying the resource of creatures is easiest to do in black or white, and doesn't need to be in the form of a Stax piece either. There are ways to set up removal engines which accomplish the same task. These decks are best against creature mid-range lists and weakest against control or combo. Then there is actual land destruction stacks. You know the thing you think of when people say stacks? These kind of come in two forms. One where you just mess with lands, often with Winter Orbs or Armageddons, and the other version where you play things that remove everything, usually Obliterate or Yockelhops. The first version is usually designed in a way that you just don't need many lands, which can be done by playing a lot of mana rocks or mana dorks. This way, when you clear up the lands, you have 6 mana remaining, and other people will only have 1 or 2. From there, you can use your extra mana to recur your lands and threats and just generally go about winning the game while everyone else struggles to catch up. The other form is more of a combo deck. You set up your board with a Planeswalker or enchantment, and then you destroy everything else. It's not exactly a combo because it takes a few turns to actually literally win, but it plays like a combo deck. And lastly, the other most common form of stacks is the hard lock. This is also kind of like a combo deck, where you set up a series of cards which makes it impossible or near impossible for your opponents to play any cards, and then you just need something that does damage to win. Here's an example. You can play Portcullis, which is a very weird card. It effectively Oblivion Rings every creature as long as there are at least 2 creatures in play. Dovescape is another goofy magic card that counters every non-creature spell and turns them into that many 1/1 birds equal to their mana cost. If you can set up a situation where you have creatures in play and your opponents don't, probably easiest to do with a Cyclonic Rift, then you just follow up with these 2 cards. and then that's a pretty tough lock. Any creature is exiled underneath the portcullis, and any non-creature spell becomes doves, which just get exiled under portcullis. Now this is not actually a hard lock. Creatures like Reclamation Sage can still break Parity because the ETB will still go on the stack. And it's not like you can use counter magic to stop the Reclamation Sage, it'll turn into doves. So throwing in a Torpor Orb or some other way that gives these cards indestructible would be needed to make this an even harder lock, but then you could still lose to like Otawara. There are lots of locks like this. Knowledge Pool Teferi is another one, but that doesn't actually stop players from playing their commanders, and Channel Lands still beat those. Basically what I'm saying is, none of these are airtight. There is almost always going to be some way out of a lock, which is why it's crucial to have a way to pressure life totals. If you're attacking with just 1/1s, players, if they wanted, can just stick it out, wait to draw the Beseiju, and then get out of the lock. Lock plus clock is the name of the game here. You really need some way to quickly close out a game after the lock has been set up. So of these strategies, which are okay to play in casual EDH, and at what bracket? For bracket 1, I don't know what to say. I don't know if there's any stacks you could do there. That doesn't make any sense, I guess. To be honest, this video has been made without bracket 1 in mind, so I'm just going to ignore it. Moving on to the other brackets. First, I want to split up stacks into a few categories. The type that denies mana, the type that denies cards, and everything else. Mana denial is obviously restricted to bracket 4 within the rules of the brackets, and I think that's for good reason. For a lot of these stacks effects, I feel like I can safely say, hey, play some removal. If you want to combo kill me, fine, but you're not going to get to do it for free, so you gotta blow up my enchantment before you can play your combo. But when you restrict mana, it becomes difficult to cast removal, even if players were responsible and put the removal in their deck. To beat mana restrictive decks, you need a low mana curve, and a deck with a lot of non-land ramp, which is kind of niche and requires you to think about that in the deck building stage. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to keep that in bracket 4, where if you build a bracket 4 deck, yeah, you have to keep in mind that land destruction might happen, and that should affect your decision making when building decks. But I also think you can say the same for stacks that denies cards. Discard heavy decks, or decks that stop card draw, are not locked to bracket 4 technically, but I do think that if you have a dedicated stacks discard list, you should probably only play it in bracket 4. Even when someone is responsible and plays removal, it might just get yoinked out of their hand before they can even cast it. So the play more removal argument kind of falls flat. Now, if we actually go down to bracket 3, I think you have a few options. Hardlock and Creature Hate are stacks that I would say you can't play in bracket 2, but are probably fine in 3. A Hardlock deck is effectively just a combo, and people play combo in bracket 3, so I feel like you can apply a similar style of power analysis. How many pieces are on the lock? The fewer the stronger. How many tutors do you have? Redundant pieces. The more the better. If your lock involves Mindslaver, Academy Ruins, ways to copy the effect multiple times, that's a lot of mana and very difficult to assemble early game. And this lock can be stopped with instant speed interaction as it has cards on board. And that type of interaction is available to most colors. I think this lock is perfectly fine in bracket 3. I would genuinely be surprised if it felt stronger than other 3-card combos already floating around in the bracket. If you're playing something like Lavinian Knowledge Pool, especially with Omen Machine backup and tons of tutors, then yeah, this hardlock is probably bracket 4. It's basically a 2-card combo. Lock decks often play like combo control lists. Creature Hate Stacks is the extreme version of the 10 board wipes control pile, since some of these effects are basically just repeated board wipes. If your playgroup or meta is dominated by the default commander deck, meaning creature midrange pile, then this deck is going to feel very strong. If your meta is diverse and healthy, full of combo, control, aggro, many different styles of decks, then it will have a unique place within that. This will be very good against the creature decks and very weak to the combo decks, meaning you might need to politics or sandbag to help creature decks take out combo players before deploying your stacks pieces. It can be a fun and rewarding deck to play when people actually play some of the counters against you. But if you are against all creature decks all the time, it's gonna feel pretty stagnant because most games will play out the same. Either you stick a stacks piece or die, and it's almost always a 3v1. If you like that, go for it. If not, maybe pass on this. Next, Hate Bears. Next is Hate Bears. This is probably the best stacks deck to play in bracket 2 and 3. These decks are usually filled with small annoying creatures that make it tricky to pop off and go crazy. And then they just play slow creatures that get value over time. These decks want the Titans, the new Overlords. You know, things that attack, do a thing, and then attack and do a thing. It really is a true creature mid-range list. You play all the greedy value creatures because you dropped some Stax piece early, and you're not going to get punished by fast combo decks. Is the ramp player going off and casting 100 spells? Not anymore. Is the blue player countering every spell people cast? Well, not anymore. Is the aristocrats player looping sack fodder and forcing everyone to lose their board? Now they can't. Your Hate Bears deck should look like this. Stax pieces that stop the thing you don't like, and then value creatures and anthems, so you attack for the win. And in bracket 5, this is really the only stack strategy that is currently viable. Ironically, the mass land destruction that most people associate with CEDH or stacks is actually really bad in CEDH. This is because everybody's playing the best artifact mana in the format, and you also only need a small amount of mana to win, so destroying lands just isn't that crazy, which makes Hate Bears a much better option because there's a lot of combo decks and Hate Bears are good against combo. Now with stacks, I think a lot of players might be worried that they will get focused down and just tank every attack and all the removal, but this can be avoided, sometimes. If you're playing a creature hate stacks deck or mana denial stacks deck, there are a lot of lists that have to prioritize taking you out of the game first, and there's not a lot you can do about that. They're just going to attack you, you're not going to fly under the radar with a spreading plague in play. But when you're playing a stacks deck within the correct power level, it shouldn't always feel like a 3v1. Balancing power levels is a big important part of playing Commander in general, including stacks. In my experience, when I play a stacks deck that is at an appropriate power level for the table, it is not a 3v1 all of the time. Because when I play High Noon, yeah, players might initially look at it with raised eyebrows, but when I say, hey, look, that player can't combo anymore, they usually just go, oh yeah, you're right, and then realize that, yeah, maybe they wanted to double spell one time, but if this person double spelled, the game's over, so they might as well keep the High Noon in play. And then we continue as normal. It may require some politics with your opponents, but if your deck is not so much stronger than the rest of the table, you shouldn't be getting focused down. Stacks effects don't always affect each opponent negatively in the same way, and create interesting table dynamics because of that. So let's say you listen to all this and you're like, I'm kind of interested in a stacks deck. How expensive is it to build one? Well, it varies quite a bit. Many of the modern stacks pieces, especially those with a reprint or two, generally have low demand, meaning you can find them for very cheap. But some of the old stacks cards that are reserve list end up being tremendously expensive and are well beyond the budget for most players. I think Hate Bears and Hardlock decks are often very cheap and can be built on a budget really easily. So if you're looking for a budget way to build a stacks list, that might be the way to go. Now, are you a stacks player? If you're on the fence about whether or not you should build a stacks deck, here are a few traits that if you have, I think you might like stacks. 1, you don't like combo. Stacks kind of shuts combo decks out. 2, you don't mind being the focus of the table. Sometimes you're going to be public enemy number 1, and you gotta accept that, because you're not gonna be able to politics your way out of every arch enemy situation. 3 is if you actually do want to politics with a table, because sometimes people just see red when they see a random thing that says you can't do that. And you kind of need to explain that, hey, you're stopping this other deck from winning, and that's good for you too. Being able to convey what your deck is trying to accomplish is really important. And lastly, you don't want the game to speed up like crazy. If you are looking to ramp harder, draw more cards, play bigger win cons, go faster, stacks is not for you. It's naturally a control-y style deck. Okay, here are some commander suggestions for different stacks themes. Teferi Mage of Zhalfir works as a great bracket 4 lockout commander. You got Knowledge Pool that you can easily tutor up with him and set up your lock. Aklazot's Deepest Betrayal is great as a discard commander. You gain life, you make blockers, and your commander is pretty recursive, so even if you tank a lot of removal, you can get your commander back. Glunch the Bestower can be a really interesting Hate Bears commander. Playing cards like Collector Oof means you can feed treasures without giving away any benefit. You can play cards like Meekstone or Crackdown and then put counters on other players' creatures, and then you just draw cards for free. Or the other way around, you give one person card draw and yourself treasures, and then you blow up lands, and you just make treasures every turn and play mana dorks. And then it doesn't matter if you give them cards because most of their lands got blown up. Glunch is a weird card, and building him in a Stax style is kind of wacky, and it's an idea I've been thinking of a lot, but never actually constructed. Another classic Stax commander is Rurik Thar. Now I know Rurik Thar is a Punisher effect on his own, but basically you can build a deck where the whole goal is to turbo ramp into a big red Stax effect, and then once that happens, turbo ramp into your commander and just kill your opponents. It sounds silly, but that is a legitimate, real way to win games. It's actually pretty strong. You can also play a rule-setting deck with Codie and try and Fractured Identity to gift a copy of Codie to each player. You can donate a bunch of useless crap to other players and make it difficult for them to do different things. I made a whole brew around this idea for a themed challenge from Salubrious Snail, and I'll leave a link to that brew in the description below if you want to check it out. Stax is a fascinating archetype. People have this notion that decks can only go one way. You have to make your deck faster and more efficient, and there's nothing else. Otherwise, you just leave it as is. And that makes sense. It's easy to imagine how a deck can just overpower another deck. If their deck wins on turn 6, build a deck that wins on turn 5. And then if their deck wins on turn 5, build a deck that wins on turn 4, and so on and so forth. Building a faster, stronger deck is the easy solution to power creep and losing games. But Stax spits in the face of this. It doesn't speed the game up. It tells everyone to play fair Magic by force. Yeah, a Drannith Magistrate is really annoying if your deck is trying to play your commander and snowball into a win as quickly as possible. But if somebody has a goofy 8-mana commander, they probably don't mind the Magistrate, right? Like, they're waiting anyway to cast their commander. Their deck is slower. They're not able to play their commander on turn 4 and spin into a win on turn 6. So when I play Stax, sorry, you can't make a million treasures and pop off this turn, because they enter tapped. It's a little harder for you to storm off. You might have to wait a turn. You might need to remove 1 or 2 things I have in play before you can do your combo, which I think is good. I like the push and pull of faster decks and slower control-y decks. It makes the game more interesting that there's more directions for decks to go. And I think a lot of Stax decks are fun to build and play around. This archetype is genuinely unexplored. There are so many weird, interesting, symmetrical effects that are seemingly bad that can be built around in different ways to get around these downsides. And I think that's cool. Cards don't have downsides anymore. They just do something stronger. But I think it's fun to work with a card that has a downside and make it strong for you or not affect you. Brewing a Stax deck is a unique experience that I think everyone should give a try. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting at the very least. If you play any Stax decks or are interested in building one, let me know about it in the comments below. Special thanks to my tier 3 patrons whose names you see here. I really appreciate all of the support. If you want to join the Patreon and be in the credits like these people, check out the link below.